Good morning, good afternoon, dear ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, and monitoring focal points in countries all around the world. It's my great pleasure on behalf of the UN Water Integrated Monitoring Initiative for Sdg 6 to welcome you to our session today. The session's entitled Presenting the 2021 Global Status of Water and Sanitation. My name is Will Reedhead. I am the Global Monitoring Officer from UN Water and the coordinator of the Integrated Monitoring Initiative, and it's my pleasure to be here with you today. Before I go ahead, I just want to say how amazing it is in this period of the pandemic when pretty much everything in the world has been turned upside down, how somehow the technology has evolved in such a way that when only a couple of years ago, it would have been impossible to have a webinar with people from all over the world. And we've tried this in the past and it was difficult, but it's just amazing how things have improved just in these last couple of years to make this possible. And instead of being, the huge challenge we expected with the pandemic to implement this project, actually this technology has made it possible to reach people that we never reached before. So it's really doubly great to be with you here today. So I'll just start this session out with a few practicalities. One of the advantages of having this online is that it makes it easier for us to provide translation to our different audiences. So this session is kind of aimed toward the Eastern Hemisphere of the world, which is why we in Europe are up at 7:30 in the morning. We're providing translation into Arabic and Russian. And to access this, you hopefully would have downloaded the Interaxio app already. So that's the first point. The second point then is just basically a few guidelines how we'll interact during this session. We will be using the Zoom chat. We will be using the Zoom chat and not the Pathable chat for our communications today. So I'm sorry, I'm just getting some pop-ups on my screen. So when we come to the chat time, or if you have any questions during the session, you can post them in the Zoom chat. But when we come to the Q&A period, which will be about 2/3 of the way through the session, you'll also have the chance to raise your hand and to take the floor. If you want to post any questions in your own language, I suggest you post them in the Zoom chat in your language and we will translate them and then repeat them back in English. In addition, we are having, just to make it a little bit more fun, we've put a few questions in the poll box, and I'll show you this in a second. So I need to stop sharing my screen for a second. Sorry, just bear with me. Okay, so if you can see this, the polls are here. So this is on the Pathable platform. The polls are here under the polls tab. And you can see, for example, here are the questions. So the first one right now is, which is your favorite Sdg 6 target? So if you want to try practicing on that one now, I welcome you to do that. Okay, I'm moving on back to the presentation. Can you all see my PowerPoint again? Yes? Rick, are you seeing the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, fine. Okay, so moving on then. So the agenda for today, so we will start out with just a quick introduction to the Integrated Monitoring Initiative and what we're trying to do here. Then the biggest part of the session will be given to the UN custodian agencies, who are going to spend a few minutes for each indicator, showing kind of the main things that they have found during the latest data collection around. Then we'll have a okay, sorry, I'm getting points that people are not seeing my screen. So let me stop for a second. Sorry about this, technical problems. Okay. Are you now seeing my PowerPoint screen? Yes. Rick, you answered the wrong thing. Okay. It's the last time I call on Rick. Okay. So, yeah, so we'll have findings, brief presentations from the different custodian agencies, and followed by a question answer with the audience, where you'll have a chance to ask some questions and contribute to the discussion, and then wrap this up with some concluding comments. Okay, moving on. So this slide, just a few words about the Integrated Monitoring Initiative. As you are aware, as part of the Agenda 2030, there's a dedicated goal, Sdg 6, on water and sanitation. This goal has 11 global indicators. This has all been agreed by member states as part of the Agenda 2030. You can see these 11 indicators here. Each of these indicators has a UN custodian agency whose job is to basically develop and support these different methodologies for collecting the data and work with member states to help them to do that. All of this is for the larger purpose of building capacity in member states for accessing and analyzing data to inform evidence-based water and sanitation policymaking, and of course to achieve our goal of sustainable water and sanitation around the world. None of this would be possible without the very generous support of a number of donors. So there's just kind of three pillars I want to touch on. The first one, which we're calling actions here, the first one is about helping policy and decision makers to take informed actions. So this is based on data, evidence-based action. At the kind of the small scale, you can see that data help us to make informed decisions on achieving particular results, and also some learning about what has worked and what hasn't worked. And one example of this is targeting specific wastewater treatment interventions. It's also really useful to have data, especially if you can disaggregate it to figure out whether you're reaching all of the necessary populations. In particular, you can think about are women being reached by our interventions, or are disadvantaged groups being reached by our interventions? So making sure that no one is left behind and helping us to prioritize our resources. It also can serve as an early warning system to help flag emerging problems before they get too big and can't be addressed easily. And then at kind of the higher level, at the national level or the international level, having good data helps to ensure accountability, and to attract commitments and investments from the international community. One of the main tenets of how we work with data is this concept of integration. You may have seen this slide before. It's one of our favorite slides, but here on the left, you kind of see these data in columns. This is the status quo when we have different data by different sectors, but it's not necessarily being analyzed in a holistic way. So you might have health data or environment data or energy data, which is meaningful in its own right. But until you actually pull those pieces together, you don't get the most value for seeing the big picture. The second action is encouraging national and subnational data collection. So this is basically the capacity building aspect of our work. So in 2020 was the second global data drive that we've done as the Integrated Monitoring Initiative. The first one was in 2017. We followed a process which we've increasingly streamlined over time, where custodian agencies reach out to a set of technical focal points in country with a set of instruments, and then work with them to help them access data, go through a validation process where both parties kind of look at the quality of the numbers and make sure they make sense, and then pull this together into global database. And we provide a whole range of different types of support to countries, which you can see at the bottom of the page there. And as I mentioned, in this past year or two, we've done a lot more virtual online support than we have kind of face-to-face support. You can see here kind of the results of our work. Back when this initiative started, no countries were reporting any global indicators. In 2019, following the baseline exercise, the average country was reporting 7 indicators out of 12. And then following this most recent data drive, we got up to 8.2 indicators on average in each country in the world. So we're seeing some impact in terms of how countries have the capacity to do this. We also have currently 92 countries in the world that are reporting 9 or more indicators, which is really great. And just to say that it's really amazing we've been so successful because we really didn't know what the pandemic was going to do to the data drive because, I mean, it turned everything upside down. But hats off to our focal points who put in really all the effort and dedication to make this happen. Thank you very much. And then finally, just third action is about raising awareness. So this is basically
Three first asked me stop sharing it because they weren't getting any incentives. And Instagram
sorry, make sure that everyone is muted. Everyone who's not, yes, thank you very much. So this last bit is the report writing. So earlier in the year, in March, we released the summary progress update, which is a short summary of the main messages from the data drive. And this fed into the high-level PGA high-level meeting on water and sanitation. And now this session, today, this week, we are releasing indicator-specific reports that go into more detail. But the message, unfortunately, is the same, is that we are not on track to achieve SDG 6 by 2030. Some indicators are showing good progress, and they're maybe almost on track, but others are really way off. In some cases, needing to quadruple our progress, increase it by a factor of 4. So we have some work in front of us. So that wraps up my introduction here. I'd just like to remind you then, so we are going into the part of the session where the agencies are going to speak a little bit about their findings so far. There are 3 quiz questions that are related to the numbers you're going to see in these presentations. So while you're listening to the presentations, keep an ear open to answers for those quiz questions and complete the poll. Okay, thanks. I'd now like to hand over the floor to my colleague Rick Johnston from WHO, who's going to talk to us about, start us off with indicator 6.1 on drinking water. Rick.
Thank you, Will, and hello, everybody. My name is Rick Johnston, and I work at WHO headquarters in Geneva. I co-lead the WHO UNICEF Joint Monitoring Program, or JMP, which is responsible for global monitoring of progress on SDG targets 6.1 and 6.2 on drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene. The JMP is co-led by my colleague Tom Slaymaker at UNICEF, who is currently sleeping in New York because it's the middle of the night. So I'll be presenting today on behalf of both WHO and UNICEF. Next slide, please. So SDG Target 6.1 aims to achieve universal and equitable access to safe and affordable drinking water for all by 2030. And the global indicator that we use to track progress is the proportion of the population using safely managed drinking water services. And a safely managed service means having an improved water source that meets 3 criteria. The drinking water is accessible on the premises, it's available when needed, and it's free from contamination. Now, the latest estimates just published in July of this year show that 26% of the world's population, that's 2 billion people, lacked safely managed drinking water services in 2020. And furthermore, the current rate of progress needs to be quadrupled to meet the global target. Next slide, please. The JMP progress report shows that many countries still don't have sufficient national data to report on the SDG global indicator. Those are the countries shown in gray on this map. So in 2020, national estimates were available for 138 countries, areas, and territories, representing 45% of the global population. Data on accessibility, availability, and quality of drinking water are more widely available for middle and high income countries. Next slide. We use what we call service ladders to track the population using safely managed services, which are shown in dark blue at the bottom of the ladders, and then basic services, light blue, limited services, yellow, as well as those using unimproved sources and surface water in orange. Now, estimates for safely managed services are available for 5 of the 8 SDG regions, but current trends suggest that none of these regions is currently on track to achieve universal access by 2030. Globally, we can see that 771 million people still lacked even a basic drinking water service in 2020. 8 out of 10 of them lived in rural areas, and nearly half lived in least developed countries. Next slide, please. Now, since 2000, there's been a lot of progress. Billions of people have gained access to drinking water services, but those historical rates of progress will not be sufficient to achieve the SDG target of universal access by 2030. Could I have the next slide, please? Achieving universal access even to basic services will require a doubling of current rates of progress, and achieving universal access to safely managed services will require a 4-fold increase in the current rate of progress. So this will require a substantial increase in current levels of investment in drinking water services. Could you move ahead 2 slides, please? Let's go to SDG Target 6.2 now, which aims to achieve access to adequate and equitable sanitation and hygiene for all, and to end open defecation by 2030, paying special attention to the needs of women and girls and those in vulnerable situations. We have 2 global indicators for this target. One is for sanitation and one is for hygiene. If we could advance to the slide about the sanitation indicator, the global indicator we use to track progress is the proportion of population using safely managed sanitation services. And that means using an improved sanitation facility that's not shared with other households, and where the excreta produced are either treated and disposed of in situ or removed and treated off-site. And the latest estimates show that 46% of the world's population, that's 3.6 billion people, lacked safely managed sanitation services, and 494 million people still practiced open defecation in 2020. Just as for safely managed drinking water, the current rate of progress would need to be quadrupled to achieve the global target by 2030. I apologize for the slides. It seems the presentation is frozen. The next slide should be a map that shows that many countries still don't have sufficient national data to report on the SDG Global Indicator. We had estimates available for 120 countries, areas, and territories, representing 81% of the global population. And one of the things that was most interesting from the report is that we learned that beginning in 2020, more people now use on-site sanitation facilities, such as septic tanks and improved pit latrines, than have sewer connections. So that's a big change. But while most countries have data on treatment of wastewater from households that are connected to sewers, very few countries have data on the treatment and disposal of waste from septic tanks and pit latrines, which remains a major data gap. We use similar service ladders to track the population using safely managed services, shown in dark green, or basic services in light green, and limited services in yellow, as well as those using unimproved facilities and practicing open defecation, shown in orange. We have estimates for safely managed services for 7 out of the 8 SDG regions, but none of those are currently on track to achieve universal access by 2030. I'm hoping that we can get the slides back. Will, I'm sure you're working on that, but I'd like to move on to hygiene next, but it would be great if we could just advance to slide 20, which has the second indicator for target 6.2. That's the proportion of the population with basic hygiene services. And that means having access to a hand washing facility with soap and water at home. The latest data that we have show that in 2020, nearly a third of the world's population, 29%, or 2.3 billion people, lacked the means to wash hands with soap and water at home, which of course makes it very hard for people to apply one of the most basic measures to protect themselves against infectious diseases, including COVID-19. Thanks. Let's move to slide 21, which is the map showing the proportion of people with a hand washing facility with soap and water available at home. We can see that most of the data, one more slide, please. Most of the data come from household surveys in low and middle income countries. High income countries just don't have as many household surveys. And when they do, they typically don't ask about water, sanitation, and hygiene, as universal coverage is presumed. So in the JMP report that came out a few months ago, national estimates were available for 79 countries, areas, and territories, representing just over half of the global population. And you can see from the map that data were most commonly available in sub-Saharan Africa, where coverage rates tend to be lower. The next slide, the hygiene service ladder includes basic hygiene services shown in purple, but also includes those with a hand washing facility that lacks either soap or water. We call that limited hygiene services, shown in yellow, and those with no hygiene facilities at all, shown in orange. Now, estimates for basic hygiene services were available for 4 of the 8 SDG regions, including Northern Africa and Western Asia, which is currently the only SDG region on track to achieve universal access before 2030. Access to hygiene services is lowest in sub-Saharan Africa, but is also quite low in Oceania. In both of these regions, about a third of the population has no hand washing facility at all in the home. Next slide, please. Now, in our 2021 report, for the first time, we had enough data on hand washing to show trends at the global level over the past 5 years. And we can see that if current rates of progress continue, the world will reach 78% coverage with basic hygiene services by 2030, which would leave 1.9 billion people without basic hygiene at the end of the SDGs. So just as for safely managed drinking water and sanitation services, the rate of progress would need to quadruple in order to reach universal coverage by 2030. So it's clear that while there need to be accelerations in drinking water and sanitation, the same is true of hygiene and hand washing. Next, let's look at Sdg Target 6.3, which reads, by 2030, to improve water quality by reducing pollution, eliminating dumping, and minimizing release of hazardous chemicals and materials, halving the proportion of untreated wastewater, and substantially increasing recycling and safe reuse globally. This target includes 2 indicators: the proportion of wastewater safely treated, which is monitored by UN Habitat, WHO, and UNSD, and the proportion of bodies of water with good ambient water quality, which is monitored by UN Environment. Next slide, please. Now, the first indicator is the proportion of domestic and industrial wastewater flows safely treated. And this target is about the generation and treatment of all kinds of wastewater. But as the indicator suggests, we can analyze separately industrial and domestic or household wastewater flows. UN Habitat leads on the analysis of total and industrial wastewater data, while WHO is the lead agency for domestic wastewater. And there's actually more data available on domestic wastewater, in part because we use data from household surveys, like the JMP does for targets 6.1 and 6.2. And the main headline message for household wastewater from the report is that in 2020, almost half, about 44%, of wastewater generated by households was not safely treated before discharge. Let me now turn over to my colleague at UN Habitat, Graham Alabaster, to talk about the data on total wastewater and on industrial wastewater. Graham, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed, Rick, and hello everyone. I'm Graham Alabaster. I'm the responsible officer for the UN Habitat's work on this indicator and the Chief of Habitat's Geneva office. Could we have the next slide, please? The previous slides were regard to domestic wastewater, and as Rick said, wastewater is produced by other sources, not just industry, but services and other sources. And the idea is to capture all forms of wastewater, because without understanding the full picture and knowing exactly what's going on, it becomes very difficult to apply the so-called polluter pays principle to work out where the pollution is coming from so you can do something about it. This particular part of the indicator for non-domestic and industrial uses a different sort of assessment, and it relies on reported data to questionnaires by UNSD and UNEP, which are circulated amongst the countries, and national estimates are made by the statistical offices. So the first graph that you can see here is of the proportion of total wastewater flows. That's wastewater from all sources, including, of course, domestic industrial, but also services and other sectors. And you can see basically that there's a huge range. There's many countries, of course, that report that they treat 100% of their wastewater. But in reality, the actual number of countries that report is very low, and we only have 42 countries which actually report on total wastewater. And that's actually represents about 20% of the world's population. So really, if we look at total wastewater flows, at least 70% is discharged untreated. I say at least 70% because most of the countries that are reporting are from the more developed regions, and we know that because of lack of regulation in many of the poorer countries, that the wastewater is discharged, of course, and causes lots of pollution. So the reality is, for all of wastewater, that more than 70% is still discharged untreated. If we could move to the next slide, please. And this relates to the proportion of wastewater from industries. Now, industries are very wide-ranging. Yes, they can be from, food processing and manufacturing. It also includes point sources from agricultural sources and many other things. But the situation here with reporting is even less. And we only actually have 14 countries globally who report on industrial wastewater produced, which is about 4% of the population. And again, if we look at this, we don't have enough data, of course, to make a global estimate, but for the countries that have reported, again, in excess of 70% of industrial wastewater discharge remains untreated. So the upshot and the key message from this is that we need to do more to report on both total and the industrial wastewater. And, as I said, the program is doing quite a lot to support governments and other actors at subnational level to try and collect this data and encourage the reporting to these national databases, these international databases that are managed by UNSD, Eurostat, and OECD. So I'm going to hand back to Rick there to talk finally about the global estimate for domestic wastewater. Back over to you, Rick.
Thanks, Graham. And on the next slide, you can see a map showing the domestic or household wastewater data. And because we could draw on data available from household surveys like the JMP, we could produce estimates for safely treated household wastewater in 2020 from 128 countries and areas and territories that represent 80% of the global population. Quick message is that in about half of those countries, shown in orange and red, less than half of household wastewater was safely treated before discharge. And those countries are located all over the world, in sub-Saharan Africa, but also in Latin America and the Caribbean, Eastern Europe, and Southern and Eastern Asia. And of course, this leads to deterioration of ambient water quality, which is the subject of the next indicator, 632. Let me now pass over to Stuart Warner from UN Environment, which is the custodian agency for this indicator. Stuart, over to you.
Hi, Rick. Thanks very much. Hello, everyone. This is Stuart Warner from UNEP with the update for indicator 632. This indicator monitors the proportion of bodies of water with good ambient water quality. And these bodies of water can be a section of a river, a lake, or an aquifer. And good water quality is defined by measurements of parameters that reflect pressures on water quality that are relevant globally. On the next slide, you can see the global map that shows the latest information that we have collected from 96 countries. And these data show that there are many water bodies that are still in good condition. In fact, of all the water bodies assessed, 60% were classified as good. And this is one of our main messages. Protection is easier than restoration. So efforts to protect these water bodies should be initiated now. On the next slide, you see a chart where each country is represented by a dot. And this chart shows that both good and poor water quality were reported in all world regions. And an analysis of data submitted showed that in most cases, it was nutrients that were the main cause of poor water quality. And the two main sources of these nutrients are runoff from agriculture and untreated wastewater effluent. So by improving farming management practices and the rate and type of wastewater treatment, this is essential if water quality is to be improved. On the next slide, One of the key findings from the recent data drive was that monitoring and assessment capacity is very much lower in poorer countries. These countries used far fewer measurements and reported on far fewer water bodies. In fact, of the 76,000 water bodies that were assessed in 2020, only 1% were from the 20 poorest countries. So using this limited reporting from some countries and an assessment of monitoring capacity in those countries that did not report, we estimate approximately 3 billion people and their livelihoods are at risk. This is because the health of their water bodies and the freshwater ecosystems they depend on are unknown. This information should be available to all, and not just to those from countries with the capacity to collect this information. In terms of action, a first step is to put policies in place to build the monitoring and assessment capacity globally. This includes expanding national monitoring programs, establishing suitable environment water quality standards, and improving all aspects of data management and assessment. Because often data are collected, but these data are not being turned into information and therefore are not communicated to policymakers or the wider public. So building this capacity to monitor and assess water quality is essential if management practices to protect and restore it are going to be effective. So thanks, that's it from my side. I'll hand over to my colleague Ricardo from FAO for the next update. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Riccardo Biancalani. I'm the coordinator of the Integrated Monitoring Initiative for the SDG 6 at FAO. And I'm here for two indicators for the target 6.4 on water use and scarcity. Next, please. Okay, our first indicator is the change in water use efficiency over time, which is an indicator based on the gross value added of the economy divided by the volume of water used by that economy. We can see that overall, in the past few years, since 2015, this indicator has increased by 10%, which overall is, let's say, good news. But of course, it's a global value, which does not take the entire story. So now we will try to detail it a bit. Next slide, please. Overall, on the world, we can see how most countries in green are increasing their water use efficiency. Now we have a certain number of countries who are represented in red, which are not increasing, actually are decreasing their water use efficiency. However, we can here notice no particular pattern in no sense between these two groups of countries individually. So now we try to make a sense of it by looking at the next slide, please. Here we can see the regional aggregations. And here we begin to see that, for example, we have most regions that together with the black line in the middle, which is the entire world, are increasing their water use efficiency. We have a couple of exceptions somehow in sub-Saharan Africa, which now is increasing anyway, but was also decreasing. And we have South America, I mean Latin America, which is, and the Caribbean, which is actually decreasing from 2015. And in the next slide now, we try to see what does this mean. And the meaning here is we can see the red line, which is the gross value added, and the yellow line, which is the actual water use efficiency. We see the water use efficiency is increasing, but it's which we saw at the beginning, but which increasing is below the gross value added. That is why we can say that we are still not on track for this indicator, and we will be in track if and when the yellow line will go above the red line. And so that will mean that actually and in full, the water use efficiency is increasing by all means. Next slide, please. The second indicator is on water stress. Water stress is the total withdrawal of fresh water divided by the total renewable water resources after considering the need for environmental flows. Here we can see that the 2.3 billion people live in countries that experience water stress, of which 733 million live in countries that experience a high or critically high water stress. And now we'll see some detail, please, next. By region, we can see that while the entire world is more or less on the safe side with around 18% of water stress, we have two regions in Central Asia, Southern Asia, Northern Africa, and Western Asia with a pretty high level of water stress, and another region, Eastern Asia and Southeastern Asia, with a middle to high water stress. And now we can see in the next slide a bit more detail. Here it is the water stress by country. And of course, here we have the blue countries that experience fundamentally no stress. Let's say, a very clear color country with a very low water stress. But we can see here the yellow, red, and dark red countries which experience high water stress. And this creates a sort of a belt in between around the world, which seems to span here from North Africa to Far East. And now in the next slide, we will see some more detail on this. This is one of the main features of this new report, which is the water stress, not by country, but by river basins. And here we can see more details. We can see that this, let's say, stress belt that actually spans an entire world, including North America, which was not shown before at country level, but here we can see it. And so we can see that while there is no real area without water stress, we have a main area all across the world where the water stress is concentrated and where our attention should be also concentrated. Thank you, and I pass the floor to my colleague Maya Bertule of UN Environment.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. My name is Maya Bertule. I am with the UNEP DHI Center, and I will present the first indicator on Target 6.5. And Target 6.5 sets us on course to achieve integrated water resources management at all levels, including transboundary cooperation by 2030. Next slide, please. So indicator 6.5.1 measures the degree of implementation of integrated water resources management, or IWRM, as we call it. And the key message, unfortunately, is that we still have 107 countries that are not on track to achieve the targets by 2030. I do want to note that in 2020, we received reports from 171 countries, and we also know that most countries held consultation processes with stakeholders to report on indicators. So really a huge thank you to all the focal points and really amazing efforts considering the year we have had. Next slide, please. So in terms of the results on indicator, indicator 6.5.1 is measured using an indicator survey. So a survey questionnaire that covers 33 elements of IWRM. So we measure the implementation of these elements from very low to very high degree of implementation. You can see the aggregated results on indicator here on the map. The great news for 2020 is that this year we have no countries in the very low implementation category, so no reds on the map here. The less good news is that we still have 87 countries in the lower category, so the orange and the yellow representing the low to medium low implementation of IWRM. So still some acceleration needs definitely needed in those countries. Next slide, please. So if we're looking at the distance to target, so the target we have for 2030, we see that 44 countries are well on track. So they're quite close to target already in year 2020. We also see that 22 countries made quite substantial progress, and we see that based on the data for the last 3 to 5 years, so since the baseline reporting round in 2017. However, we see that based on the rate of progress we have seen over these last 2 reporting rounds, we still have 107 countries that are not on track to achieve the target if we are to continue at this current pace of progress. Next slide, please. So in summary, what this means for the indicator globally, even though we have moved from 49 points to 54 on indicator, and that's out of 100, our target is very high degree of implementation of IWRM by 2030, and that's in the 90 to 100 points category. We will not achieve that target globally with this current rate of progress. So what we see for indicator 6.5.1, that the global pace and the rate of progress really needs to double, at least double, if we are to have a chance of achieving the target by 2030. With that, I will wrap up for indicator 6.5.1, and I'll hand it over to colleagues from UNEC. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Maya. Good morning to all, or good afternoon to all. My name is Sarah Tiefenauer-Linnerdon, and I coordinate reporting on Indicator 652 within UNEC. So Indicator 652 has 2 custodian agencies, UNEC and UNESCO. And the indicator monitors the cooperation over transboundary or shared waters amongst countries. And it's quite a milestone that these waters are included within the SDG framework, as all 60% of the world freshwaters are transboundary. So worldwide, 153 countries share rivers, lakes, and aquifers. However, from these countries, only 24 reported that they have all the transboundary waters covered by operational arrangement. And only an additional 22 countries indicated that 70% of the waters were covered by arrangement. In the next slide, you can see the results by countries. So on the positive aspect, we have had a really high response rate and a great engagement from countries in the second reporting exercise in 2020. So 80% of the countries sharing waters responded. However, we also see that there's still some data gaps because the indicator value is available now for 101 countries. So most reports are very expensive, rich in information, and they provide the current status of transboundary cooperation. And we also noticed that some reports were prepared in consultation with neighboring countries or with basin organization, and this provides an opportunity to have a dialogue over these shared waters. In the next slide, you can see the status of the cooperation by SDG region. There's quite a great diversity within the region. However, Europe, North America, and Sub-Saharan Africa shows the greatest level of cooperation. Other regions, despite exceptions, still need further progress to achieve the target by 2030. And it's significant that of the reported waters, at least 128 river and lake basins still lack agreement. So this shows the impetus to improve cooperation over these shared resources. Now I will pass on to Alicia Rowley from UNESCO.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Looking at this slide and considering the very high response of the countries to providing data for the indicator, one of the results of the monitoring of this process has shown to us that there is still an incredible lack of knowledge on groundwater resources, in particular on transboundary aquifers. So definitely UNEC and UNESCO will have to increase their capacity to support and to train countries in assessing their groundwater resources and transboundary aquifers in order to reach the target and the goal. Next slide, please. Again, considering the number of countries who have sent the report to UNEC and UNESCO with the interesting data about the indicator, Still, there is an insufficient number of countries that have set up operational agreements for the management of their international rivers, transboundary lakes, and transboundary aquifers. And then there is a need for accelerate cooperation amongst the countries for the sustainable governance and management of their transboundary waters. And again, in the accelerator capacity development target, we will have to continue to support educations and capacity development. I then pass over to my colleague, Stuart Crane, for the indicator 661. Thank you.
Thanks, Alice, and hello everyone. My name is Stuart Crane and I work with the UN Environment Programme, where I coordinate UNEP's work on SDG 6. And I'll speak briefly now on indicator 661, which is the only indicator under target 66. So SDG indicator 661 measures how much our freshwater ecosystems are changing. And this is important to know because our freshwater ecosystems, and these are our lakes and our rivers and our wetlands and our aquifers, they provide us with all of the freshwater goods and services that we need to live and to develop sustainably. And Target 66 asks the countries work to protect and restore these ecosystems. And we measure how our surface water bodies are changing over time by using satellite Earth observations. And these allow us to observe very high resolution changes to all surface water bodies across the world over very long time periods, as far back as the 1980s. So what freshwater ecosystem changes are we seeing? Well, if we look back over the last 20 years of data as surface water changes within all of the world's river basins, we're finding that in the last 5-year period, we are observing very dramatic changes to available surface water in over 1/5 of the world's river basins. Next slide, please. And this point is illustrated well on this global map. And the two colors to pay attention to here are the light blue. And these areas are representing those river basins that have experienced very high increases in the surface water area in those last 5 years. And these high increases correspond to areas experiencing flooding, where there's been a growth in reservoirs and also newly inundated and flooded land. And the yellow areas on the map represent the river basins that are showing rapid declines in surface water area. And this is indicative of the drying up of lakes and drying up of wetlands and floodplains, and also the loss of seasonal water bodies. And many of these observed changes to surface water may also be indicative of climate change, which we now believe is accelerating the drying out of lakes in the arid regions and the expansion of lakes from increased glacial melting and increased rainfall. Next slide, please. And one particularly important subset of freshwater ecosystems are wetlands, and these are both inland wetlands such as peatlands, but also coastal mangroves. And these wetland ecosystems have experienced a very persistent decline over the last 100 years, with an estimated 80% loss globally. And on this graph, you can see this direction of change quite clearly. And this 80% loss of wetlands is significant because wetland ecosystems provide a number of very important roles, including trapping carbon from the atmosphere and locking it into the ecosystem, protecting coastal areas from storm surges, and also retaining floodwater and helping absorb and purify surface water runoff. So that's the big picture global state and direction of change of our freshwater ecosystems. And so to reverse this global trend, countries need to act very quickly to restore those ecosystems that are being degraded and protect those that are currently in a good state. And countries interested in country-specific data and basin-level data are, of course, these data are freely available on UNEP's Freshwater Ecosystem Data Portal. I'll now hand over to my colleague, Bruce Gordon from WHO for the next indicator. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Stuart. My name is Bruce Gordon, and I coordinate the WASH work at WHO Geneva, and I'm presenting on behalf of my colleagues in the GLASS program. So these are the final two indicators in SDG 6, and these are 6A and 6B, and I think sometimes overlooked, but the so-called means of implementation indicators, and they're really examining the resources and mechanisms to realize, sort of the totality of SDG 6. And the specific indicators that are being examined. Our first 6A, which is international cooperation, or in sort of crude terms, we're just presenting ODA flows, which I'll talk about. And then the second is 6B, which is local participation. The first indicator comes in cooperation with the OECD creditor reporting system. So it's fresh data from there. Although when I say fresh data, it's 2019 data. So I'll talk about that in a moment. Next slide, please. So the target language is for 6A is by 2030 to expand international and capacity building to support countries on water harvesting, desalination, water efficiency, wastewater treatment, recycling, and reuse technology. So a real mouthful, but this is really looking, as I said, about the aid flows. So $8.8 billion were dispersed. And the big message is that there has been really little change. Disbursements were about the same over the last 5-year period. There was a slight increase in commitments, but there's really been no step change in aid to respond to the SDGs. And that is despite, all the data that you've seen from all my colleagues showing a huge lag and a 4-fold increase needed on some of these targets. While aid is not necessarily going to solve everything, it's a smaller percentage of expenditure. It is certainly important. Next slide. So this is looking at where aid, these ODA flows have been directed. In 2019, Sub-Saharan Africa has received the largest share of ODA disbursements for the water sector of any SDG region. So, and that's about at 1/3. And disbursements to the Sub-Saharan region have increased, very slightly from $2.8 billion in 2015 to $3.1 billion in 2019. So that is kind of the picture of where aid has been distributed regionally. Next slide, please. And then we look at local participation. And so this is data that you're seeing now from the 2019 GLASS report. So it's aged a little bit, and I wanted to signal to all of you that the GLASS efforts on primary data collection are actually being implemented sort of as I speak. So in more than 100 countries, we're going to be collecting this and other data, and it should be out in the 3rd quarter of 2022. But this target is about supporting and strengthening the participation of local communities in improving water and sanitation management. Next slide, please. And the big message here is that as far as countries reporting a high level of participation by communities and users, and what I mean by high is really collaborative management and engagement in decision making. It's quite a low number. So 14 out of 109 countries are reporting that kind of ideal engagement, but most countries are reporting consultation sort of only, but not necessarily engagement and decision making. Next slide, please. And again, this is another map trying to kind of illustrate how, to what extent has there been procedures or laws that define local participation in the various subsectors. So whether it's urban or rural sanitation or water resource management, are there laws or procedures? And you'll see the light blue sort of signaling, good laws or procedures or policies, but these may not necessarily be realized at all. So if we go to the next slide, despite having, potentially good participation on paper, most countries are, and especially developing countries, are reporting that they are lacking the funding required to engage on participation. So whether that's convening meetings or finding some way of getting user input in decision making, there seems to be quite a barrier here in terms of financial resources to make this happen. So overall, that's this kind of the status on 6A and 6B, and I'll pass now to the back to the UN Water team. Over.
Thanks a lot, Bruce, and thanks to all of my colleagues in the UN agencies. This is really exciting stuff, and congratulations to all of you for doing having such great results during a difficult time. Apologies to everyone else. I knew I spoke too soon. I was saying how great technology was. During the beginning of the first slides there, my computer completely froze up, so that's why we had the lags on the presentations. So apologies for that. And thanks to my colleague Sarah, who stepped in there very quickly to fix things. And I'm in control again. I'm going to try sharing my screen again. I hope it does not crash again. So before we go on to the Q&A, I just want to go back to the polls. Hopefully you had a chance to see, to look at those questions. Let's see what the results are. 1 second. Okay, so the first question of the quiz is how many people lack access to safely managed sanitation? So the correct answer there is 3.6 billion people. So it's great to see that. Oh, I see people are still answering the question. So maybe I should wait for a second. But yes, so 3.6 billion is the correct answer there. And I see the majority of people got that right, and even more getting it right now that I've given you the answer. The 2.3 billion answer actually is not for this indicator, but it's for water stress. It's 2.3 billion people suffering from water stress, and it's also for the same number who is lacking access to hand washing facilities. Just a coincidence, although I imagine a lot of the people who are water stressed are the same ones who are lacking hand washing facilities, but that is just a coincidence. And the 2 billion people is referring to those without drinking water, safe drinking water. Question 2 is how many of the world's monitored basins are located in the lowest income countries? So the right answer is, anyone? 1.2%. Actually, no one is given that answer. So as you might imagine, the lowest income countries have the least capacity for the monitoring of water basins. And questions 3, how many countries have all their transboundary water basins covered by operational agreements for cooperation? And the answer for that one is 24. So I hope you enjoyed that quiz. I hope it helped you, incentivize you to pay close attention to the presentations. I'd now like to go to the Q&A. So just as a reminder, if you can either post questions in the chat, and I see that many of you have been doing that all along. If you have a question that's not in English, you post it in the chat and we'll try to translate it before reading it back in English. Or you can raise your hand and we will call on you. Okay, so let's see what we've got here. Do I see any hands raised? Okay, I see one hand raised. Frank Chisoni Nioni, I will give you the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. The session has been very interesting, although very brief, the presentations. But my question goes to Bruce Gordon. In his presentation, he did indicate that 34% of ODA came to Sub-Saharan Africa. I'm in Zambia, so part of Sub-Saharan Africa. I'm also impressed to note that Zambia actually fell in the blue category between 5 and 6, the one showing countries that have put together legislative framework for water and sanitation management. That is a good one. But I wanted to find out Of course, when this ODA was coming, there are intentions or programs for which they were meant, things they needed to work on. So how do you compare the effectiveness of the outcomes for which the ODA was intended, specifically for Sub-Saharan Africa, where 34% of ODA actually came in? That is what I thought I could ask. I think I didn't hear very much. Other regions received lesser, looking at those percentages. So how about the outcomes? Is it effective, or are other regions that have received lesser ODA more effective than Sub-Saharan Africa that received more? Thank you so much.
Well, it's a tremendous question, Frank, and there's many, I think, elements to the answer. But I think, first of all, let me talk about a little bit about the limitations of the indicator. So the actual formal, I guess, indicator, the approved indicator is ODA as part of a government-approved plan. And in many countries, that data is not available. So the idea is that what the international community decided to do with 6A was really to try to understand what good aid would be. So good aid meaning that it was incorporated into government planning and budgets. And so, but what I presented was essentially a crude indicator of just of ODA that went across. So the quality of the aid isn't necessarily spoken to. And then the other issue that, of course, confounds things is the amount of aid that would have been expended. So I would have to look at Zambia figures specifically, but sometimes it's quite high, more than 50%, and sometimes it could be quite low. But yes, the question is ultimately, did this have an impact? And ultimately, you would be looking at some of my colleagues' data, and specifically, for example, on JMP to say, okay, well, did this have an impact over time, years later? So we really don't have a way to sort of judge the effectiveness of the aid that went across beyond in the creditor reporting system, the individual donors may have reports on that quality, but an overall assessment we don't have over.
Thanks, Bruce. I saw that we had a hand up from Eva Valencia. Yep, and she's back. Eva, I give you the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much also for the presentation. It was very clear, each of the results of the SDG indicators. I have a question regarding human rights and how do you see the link between the SDGs and the human rights? And is there any report that has done this link with the human right to water? I'm thinking this also, thinking of a qualitative indicator that can be applied to each context, that can be useful in each of the SDGs targets.
Okay, thanks.
Please tell me if it was clear.
Yes, very clear. I'd like to open that to the agencies. This will be interesting because this, of course, is cross-cutting from all of our work. Do any of the agencies want to say anything about the human rights? I call it Alice. This is Alice from UNESCO answering. Alice, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, definitely access to water is a human right. And all the data we are collecting are now giving to us an idea where are the main risks and gaps, looking at all the indicators, not only one, all the indicators together, where countries are the most difficult capacity and lack of capacity to access water. So to comply with the basic human right. And this is true when you look at transboundary waters, because of course there is a real crucial issues about conflicts between countries with impacts on the population, and for the other indicators the same.
Thank you, Alice. I see Rick. Rick, you would like to add something to that?
Yeah, I think the human rights approach has really advanced in recent years, over the last 10 years, say, and with the recognition of both sanitation and water as being separate human rights. And one thing to note about the human rights and the SDGs is that the SDG indicators are incomplete measures of human rights. So there are aspects of the human rights to water and sanitation that are not covered with any of the indicators, maybe because they're too difficult to monitor, at least on a global scale. So it's definitely possible for a country to have, say, 100% safely managed drinking water and 100% safely managed sanitation services, but still have elements, where work needs to be done. The nice thing about the human rights approach is that it applies to all countries. So even high income countries definitely have work to do to ensure that everyone has access to, high quality services. Thanks. I'll put in the chat, by the way, a link to the special rapporteur on the human right to water and sanitation, because there's an office there through the High Commission for Human Rights that has a lot of reports on specific issues related to the human rights.
Great, thanks, Rick. Actually, I'd like to take this chance to add two things. First is I didn't say much about UN Water itself, but we are a coordination mechanism in the UN system, working with pretty much all of the UN agencies who have anything to do with water and sanitation. There's more than 30 of them, and all the organizations with a global scope working on water and sanitation. There's another 40 of those. So whereas you're seeing about 8 of the agencies here in this session, these are the ones who are the custodians for these very specifically defined indicators. We actually have a lot more members and partners who have a broader mandate, including human rights. So this comes up very much in our meetings and our other things that we do as a mechanism. The second thing is kind of loosely related to human rights. I thought it would be interesting to mention that starting this year and going on in the future, we have kind of an extra focus on what we're calling gender contextualization. So the SDG 6 global indicators don't explicitly mention gender, just as they don't explicitly really mention human rights. But we are looking at ways that we can kind of interpret these global indicators in the context of other information to make them more relevant to national and subnational level gender policies. And that's something that's super important. And we talk about leaving no one behind. I think we need to start by not leaving any of the women behind. So this is a new area. It's actually not easy because the indicators really were not written with that in mind in particular, with the exception of the WASH indicators, which are lending themselves reasonably easily. But something that's really exciting. And as we go on into future phases, we're trying more and more about how we contextualize our numbers to make them relevant to all different demographic groups. Just a bit of a plug there for our gender work. Can I see some more questions, please? We've had a lot of good discussions in the chat box, and I think we've answered a lot of the questions as they came up, but I'd love to have some more thoughts here in live discussion. Don't be shy. If you have anything you want to say or any comment, doesn't have to be a question, it can be a comment. I'd like to hear it. Okay, I see it looks like Sean Hudgens is going to be brave and ask us a question. You have the floor, Sean.
Hi there. I was just curious if there's been any thought given to, I guess, like non-Western indicators. Like I know in New Zealand, we're doing a lot of work and looking at sort of indigenous worldviews and their sort of science systems. And I know that'd be something that'd be hard to standardize, obviously, like at an international level. But I know there's, a lot of these indicators show that, parts of the world that might have perhaps really well-developed knowledge systems that aren't in sort of Western science, that if there's been any consideration to how those types of things can be measured or integrated.
Thanks, Sean. That's a tricky question. I'd like to actually turn this, because it's tricky, I'd like to hand it over to the agencies to answer it. But actually, let me just say that one of the things that makes our life both easier and harder is the fact that these global indicators were agreed by consensus by member states during the development process for the SDGs. We had to come up with a set of indicators that were relevant to as many countries as possible and with an eye to measurable. So that meant we had to make compromises. So we get feedback quite often, especially from civil society. I'm not sure if you're coming from a civil society organization, but talking about alternate sources of data, alternate, views that are responsive to particular populations, for example. And usually the answer we give is that they don't standardize too well at a global level, but that, of course, we are just the tip of the iceberg. The real stuff that matters is what countries are doing, and they need to have a whole bunch of their own national and sub-national level data flows that's really what's most important for their policy making. It's not these global indicators. So that's probably where the answer lies, is that we don't have anything globally really, but at the national level, it's much more relevant. Maya, did you want to say something about this?
Yes, thank you. I think that's a really interesting question, very relevant too. For indicator 651, I know this doesn't maybe represent exactly what you're looking for, but we in fact added an additional question as one of the dimensions of IWM after the first baseline round that covers vulnerable communities, including indigenous communities as well, and how they're included in the decision-making processes on water management. And this is exactly because this question was raised, and it is an important aspect, and this is how we've tried to address it, because you are right. I mean, something that is globally applicable across the board as an indicator would be quite difficult. But if you're looking maybe to have some insights on that, countries do provide also written explanation of what the processes are, if there are specific committees, etc. I mean, that information is available in the country responses. So maybe that's something you might want to look at. Yeah, that was all from my side. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thanks. And I should add that one of the kind of pillars of our approach to how we engage with countries is this idea of an intersectoral monitoring team, which at its narrowest is just the technical people doing each of these 11 indicators. But we like to think of it more broadly, that it would be involving other stakeholders, other organizations who are not necessarily governmental. And in that way, we like to think that we would be capturing some of these other measures. In particular, I should give a shout out to the Global Water Partnership, GWP, who's a close partner of ours on the ground in many countries, and they have their country water partnerships, which are very, very collaborative. Okay, I see we have a hand up from Mira Mehta. I don't know if this is a comment on the previous question or a new one, but I give you the floor.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I just wanted I put a question in the chat regarding whether there are any efforts in the wash sector to what we would refer to broadly as localizing SDGs. Whether there has been any efforts by UN Water to work in either, you just mentioned GWP, which was good to hear, but either with GWP or with country-owned systems, has there been any effort to do that?
Bruce, Bruce or Rick, would you like to take a stab at this?
I have to be honest, Will, I was busy responding to Anna Gren's wonderful question about affordability, and I missed a little bit of what Mira had to say. I apologize, but you'll see my answer to Anna very shortly.
Okay, that's fine, because Rick is keen to answer this. He's got his hand up and he's got his ears poking out, and Rick, go for it.
Yeah, Mira, this is a great question. I mean, one thing about the global indicators is that they're global and they're the same everywhere. But of course, different countries will have different situations and often will have different priorities and will want to focus on aspects of water and sanitation that are maybe different from the global indicators. So there are a lot of countries that have defined their own SDG targets or indicators that complement the global ones. An example that comes to mind is Indonesia, where they have specifically defined different service levels, and they can show side by side the global indicators for safely managed drinking water and sanitation next to the Indonesian indicators for higher levels of service in water and sanitation. So that's an example where they're looking at the global framework. They're saying, yes, we can report to that, but there are also these other aspects or maybe some definitions which are important to us that we're going to address separately. And there are many cases of countries doing that. I think the trick is to have them complement and be side by side, and not to try and replace one and say, we don't like that global indicator, so we're going to use this other one, and to build monitoring systems that can report on both. So they're not in competition, but they're complementary to each other.
Thanks, Rick. And I would like to make our last question of the day. I'd like to offer the floor to Sanjeev Chadha. This is the last question, and then we'll go into our closing. Sanjeev, whoops, you're gone. Sanjeev, if you'd like to speak, you can put your hand up again. I can unmute you.
Sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Great. Firstly, thank you very much for the report. It's great to see and get a real sense of how we are progressing or where we are not on the key indicators. Couple of questions. First, I noticed that the water use efficiency is up 10%. Good, but I presume not good enough. And my question there is, based on your analysis, what is the biggest opportunity or area where we can and should be focusing our efforts on increasing that number dramatically? And my second question is related to the cross-boundary cooperation, or frankly, the lack of it, which seems to be very low right now. And what is the biggest barrier in your view to that? And again, perhaps you have some understanding based on countries where it is indeed high in comparison.
Okay, thanks, Sanjeev. Can you just repeat the first question?
The water use efficiency, how can we increase that beyond, much beyond the 10%?
Okay, fantastic. So Ricardo, would you like to say something about that? Maybe keep your answer to 30 seconds, and then I'll give the floor also to either UNECE or UNESCO for the transboundary question. Ricardo.
Yes, that is a challenge. Well, it's true, it's not enough, as I tried to show. I think that in very, very short, the opportunities are not yet well analyzed, that have to be said, because the indicator is still new. But what I can see is that, of course, a reduction of the water consumption, in the sense, not much, but the reduction of water waste, an increase and improvement in the methodologies of water use, the mechanics of water use even, would be very useful, both in water distribution networks in cities, as well as the use of water for agriculture and the industry. And another aspect that we want to analyze for the next round, maybe will be in the next report, is what can be related to trade and to all the issues of virtual water, and how trade can support a lower use of water, at the same time increasing the relevant economic output. This is, of course, a very, very short, without any in-depth consideration.
Thanks, Ricardo. I appreciate the brevity. Just to everyone, we have very, very tight time constraints with the World Water Week, so they will cut us off if we go beyond our allotted time. So on the second transboundary question, a 30-second response, please.
Sorry, thank you, Will. I couldn't raise my hand. So to be very short, this is a very broad question. In general, from what we've seen on transboundary issues at well, some cases there's still some data gaps, both on surface water and especially on groundwaters, on aquifers. How are they? And then it's a very political indicator. So here with its political will that is needed and to have cooperation over these shared waters. What is an important element also is that countries do establish a dialogue on these waters. And that they understand that it's more in the end beneficial to have cooperation over these waters than just inactiveness, and that it helps to have regional integration as well as further on peace and so on. And one important effort that both UNICE, UNESCO are supporting the countries in reporting, and then also within their day-to-day work, for instance, at UNICE with work under the Water Convention, helping to have a dialogue on these waters, and within UNESCO also to improve the knowledge, especially on transboundary aquifers. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. So this concludes the Q&A session, and I'd just like to put a plug in, of course, that the indicator reports are available on our website. That we'll be having indicator-specific webinars that'll go into a little more depth during the month of September. And we're also thinking about having a global workshop for the Integrated Monitoring Initiative with the main audience will be the focal points in member states that we work with. That'll be, we don't know when, later in the year. So with that, and sorry, a request from my colleague Sarah, if you haven't already, can you please post the URLs in the chat box for all of our different websites and things? I don't have time to scroll up and down. If you've done it already, it's fine. So now for the closing comments, I'd like to hand the floor over to Dr. Veena Srinivasan. Veena is a fellow at the Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and the Environment, which goes by the acronym of ATREE. She's based in Bangalore, India. And she's also a founding member of the Integrated Monitoring Initiative Strategic Advisory Group, our SAG, and she's currently the vice chair of the SAG. So I'd like to hand over the floor to Veena for the closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Will, for that. And thanks to everyone for participating in this event at World Water Week to celebrate the launch of the 2021 SDG 6 progress reports. It is really great to see so much interest in the progress of SDG 6 over these 6 years. And I would like to personally take a moment to appreciate the painstaking work that is done by all the UN custodian agencies to produce these few glossy summary charts that we see, and just the amount of work that goes behind that. As we saw from the presentations, for the first time, we have data from 200 countries, which is a major accomplishment for the international community. But unfortunately, these numbers also confirm what we first saw in 2018, that we are off track and we need to dramatically accelerate our efforts. Last year, the SDG 6 Global Acceleration Framework was launched to mobilize action across governments, civil society, private sector, as well as UN agencies, and to better align our efforts. And the framework was founded on 5 accelerators: optimized financing, better data and information, capacity development, innovation, and governance. So we hope that the framework, as well as these reports and the events that we'll just mention, all leading up to the 2023 Conference on Water, will generate the political will that we need to accelerate global action on water and sanitation. We'd also like to encourage all of the countries present and the stakeholders here today to register their efforts on the SDG 6 action space. And the links for the reports, the SDG action space, as well as the SDG data portal, Will just mentioned, have been posted by the custodian agencies in the chat box for this event. So just wanted to say a good remainder of the day to everyone. Stay safe, and the session is now closed. Thank you.